Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new year of our outreach program events. The outreach program of the Latin American Institute is, as I always call it, a gem and an excellent example of how UCLA connects with the community. This year, we have a new topic, and this is Latin American's children's literature. And so I want to first acknowledge my colleague, Veronica Zavala, who's the outreach coordinator, and she works tirelessly with LAUSD teachers and teachers from other school districts, bringing to them seminars, workshops, and all-around expertise and state-of-the-art knowledge on Latin America and the Caribbean. Also, Ari Barrera, who's the program representative, she's helping us with the controls here, all the technical stuff. And we're going to be having roughly one talk per month throughout the academic year. This is our first talk. And the idea is that we end more or less in June or so with a hands-on in-person workshop on children's literature from Latin America. And today it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Gina Rodríguez. She is a true expert on Latin American children's literature. She has worked in the publishing industry in Mexico and the US for 17 plus years, serving as copy editor, consultant, and managing editor for Penguin Random House, Vintage Español, Santillana, and many other presses. As LA Libreria's, La Libreria's acquisition and collections development specialist, she managed relations with 45 plus publishing houses from all over Latin America. She also coordinated the first catalog of the company, 262 children's books to read in Spanish. And today, Gina is going to summon her expertise to actually give us an introduction. So it is just a wonderful occasion, and also I'm sure we're going to get a exhaustive account of the landscape of Latin American's children's literature at the hands of Gina. Gina, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruben, for this invitation. And thank you so much, Veronica and Dari, for all the help and support here. Without further ado, I'm going to share my screen here. I hope I'm going to do it correctly. So let me know if everything goes correctly. So I'm going to talk about children's literature in America, just as Ruben was saying, but this is going to be a very general introduction. So I hope it's not too much information. I tried to synthesize everything that I could possibly, that I think that you could possibly be interested about. So the route is going to be super easy, just 3 sections of this presentation that I've prepared for you today. We're going to have a very general introduction with the background, history, and some examples of what's in the background of Latin American children's literature. Then we're going to talk about the current situation, and the most important part of section of this presentation is going to be about topics and genres that I think you could use, you could be interested really about. I'm talking mostly to educators here. I prepared the whole presentation thinking of educators in the US and their students, mainly K to 12, but I hope everyone here is going to be interested somehow, and it's useful for you too. So before we start, I wanted to ask you, what's the first thing that you think of when you hear the the general title of children's literature in Latin America, what's the first thing or what's the first word that comes to your mind when talking about this? And I know you cannot participate here very much. You can actually use chat if you want to write some ideas or to participate somehow, but just think about it. Just plainly take a second and think, what's a general idea that you have about this, or what word do you have in mind? And I did myself that question. I asked myself that same question. And this is a word cloud that I created with all of those ideas and words that came up when first thinking about this and trying to prepare this presentation. So hopefully some of the things that you just thought about right now are included in this word cloud. And some of these, or most of these, we're gonna tackle in this presentation, hopefully in a very organized way. Don't get stressed out. I think it's gonna be painless. So hopefully it's easy, smooth way in the process. So the first thing that anyone can think of when talking about children's literature, as in the plain definition of the dictionary, literature in the broader way, or the broader meaning of it, we think of a body of written work. So first thing, of course, I would say book comes to mind, right? When thinking about children's literature, we think about books. And I wanted to start this because books for kids is a way to say, well, it's a very broad and general idea, and everything comes within, like everything can get in. And so I am not going to talk specifically about any of this, but I just wanted to mention it because, of course, books for kids in Latin America also include nonfiction, what we call nonfiction in the US. And that goes to history, life science, like all kinds of reference, concept memoir, everything like that. I think you want me to talk about literature, so I'm not going to tackle these things in this presentation, but it's good to always mention, especially if you are an immersion educator, or you try to teach things in Spanish or other languages, and you need resources. Well, there are all kinds of books in Latin America that can help you with. So we have books about chemistry, about ecology. We also have books, dictionaries, maps, all kinds of math, solar system, and even I'm including here the biography of Che Guevara here, that is of a graphic novel that is actually adequate for high schoolers. So all kinds of books that you can find here. It could be useful for dual immersion schools or programs, or just if you're curious and you want to know how some things are said in or taught in Latin America, we have all of this. But coming into this topic that we want to talk about right now, we are going to focus on literature like that. And for that, I am going to use Fanuel Anandia's words, who is one of our specialists in the region. And he says about, Latin America, that he thinks the idea of countries bound together by a common history, a common language, and a common idiosyncrasy, it doesn't sound, for him, it sounds like a frozen stereotype. And we're beyond that kind of stereotype now. Latin America is made of very different and diverse contexts. And so that's the premise for us to understand what's happening in this field right now. We call it we call it literatura infantil y juvenil in Spanish. So whenever you see the abbreviation, it's LIG. So that means children's literature and includes YA, of course. So when talking about LIG in Latin America, we need to have in mind that it's it's a diverse, very diverse universe, that it has a long tradition, and most of the part of the history, or the first two parts of the history, was driven by renowned authors in literature. So when I'm talking here about like big names in literature, they were part of League 2 in our continent. So don't worry, this is going to be super short. I'm just going to name the 3 big periods in time that I believe we can sum up with the history of literatura in Latin America. So I am basing this in some of the books that have been published recently about like the history of children's literature in Latin America, and I am including these resources in the end of the presentation. So first, we have that in the last part of the 19th century and first half of the 20th century, most of the famous authors of the scope, like in general literature of Latin America, they were also involved somehow in writing for children. So some of the big names started to think that, children exist also, and we could write for them too, somehow in a way, as part of these big campaigns, literacy campaigns in the continent, and like with intentions of education and like bringing culture to children, but also with literary intentions. So I'm just going to name some examples here because they are like key names. Jose Marti, for example, from Cuba, and this example, all of these examples are like re-editions of classic works that were published more than 1 century ago. So this example actually has been reprinted very recently by a publishing house in Guatemala. And Jose Marti was a big name back then. He organized a magazine for like a children's literature magazine. And like he was a promoter in this realm. One other big name was Gabriela Mistral. She was a Nobel Prize, so really big name, Nobel Prize in Literature. She's from Chile, but worked for a long time in Mexico. And here we can see one example of a re-edition of her classic tales. This one is The Little Red Hood, and The Little Red Hood told by Gabriela Mistral in the form of poems. But this is a series of books that have been recently published by Manuta, a publishing house in Chile. The stories are very close to the original story that we all know, but it's interesting because she thought that it would be good to have a version for Latin American kids of these stories. And another big name in this period was Rubén Darío from Nicaragua, another Nobel Prize in literature. And he also wrote some pieces of work for kids. This is a re-edition by Ecarejo, press in Venezuela and Spain. So for this is like the big names that founded really what we call now Latin American literature. And I included this collection of other, short pieces, poems, short stories, and texts by also like big names that wrote for children. Pablo Neruda, Horacio Quiroga, Nicolás Guillén, they are all from all over Latin America. And this is a collection that you cannot find very easily. So I just included the link for you if you wanna, go ahead and take a look what they, what kind of works they wrote for kids back then. The second big period that I am going to refer here is what I call the new classics, just because they published between the 60s and the 90s of the 20th century. And these are our new classics, but I'm gonna say many of them also wrote for like grown-ups or like normal literature. But some of these pieces really are thought for kids. And it kind of changes the landscape, what happened in these decades, because they really thought of, putting themselves in the experience or like through the eyes of a child. And they wrote these books with that in mind. So that is really considered children's literature from my point of view. One of the names, I'm just handpicking here, one of the big names is Maria Elena Walsh from Argentina. This is a re-edition that you can actually find nowadays. Another big name is Laura de Betach. She's also from Argentina, and this book was originally published in 1964, but it was banned in Argentina during the 70s, during the dictatorship. So I think it's a very, very good book. It's super tender, it's sensitive, it speaks to kids, really. It's a collection of short stories. And this is a newer edition, but it's not that easy to find right now in the US. So I'm including a PDF here just in case you're interested and you want to take a look. The book, after it was banned, the book survived thanks to the teachers that were insistent in sharing the book with their kids, with their students. So she actually dedicates the new edition to those teachers. And this is one of our big bestsellers in Mexico. This one is from it was published originally in 1992. Francisco Hinojosa is one big name in children's literature nowadays. But this was the first big book that he ever published and that got great success. So everyone, it has sold thousands and thousands of copies in Mexico. And when I was working at the bookstore, I remember that I was kind of surprised that people weren't asking for this title so often. And I was told that, well, it's because the name is La Peor Señora del Mundo, which means the worst lady in the world. And that is kind of shows an evil character. So it kind of sounds that in the US, people are like a little bit worried of showing kids some, bad examples, I guess. But believe me, when kids read this book, they laugh and laugh and laugh. And it's so funny that it all makes sense. When you share the experience of reading this book with kids, you understand why it's been a success. And of course, we have also other big names in literature that have written for kids in this period, such as Julio Cortázar. I'm including Elena Poniatowska and Antonio Skármeta here. And this news, actually, I found out like 2 weeks ago or something, that even Isabel Allende is now writing for the kids. So yeah, everyone, once in a while, every big name wants to write for kids too. And well, the third part, or the third period that we are going to talk about, is of course the current situation, the last 3 decades. And I'm gonna say that in this part of the situation, well, it's not just authors or big names that are driven or driving the or moving the scene. but whole editorial teams. So they, they hire authors by titles translate, or, they organize the whole industry, and it's them who organize, well, they have become bigger. It's like really a boom in Latin America. And also the key figure of this situation, or the equation nowadays, is illustrators. So now illustrators as, well, on their own, or illustrators as companions for writers or authors, have become well, super necessary when talking about children's literature in Latin America. And it all comes down today into this big ecosystem that is happening. Well, we have a publishing industry, we have book fairs nationally and internationally being held. We have reading campaigns, international associations, awards, and everything that goes, it really boils in this ecosystem of children's literature. And that gives me the chance to talk about more of how what's happening nowadays in this ecosystem. And the question would be, how would you talk about Latin American books? Like, if we're talking about, yes, diversity, but a bunch of countries all together, what's the nationality of a book? If you don't know anything about Latin American literature, could you go to a bookstore and say, hey, please give me a book of Peru or a book from Chile? Well, as you perhaps saw from the examples that I just mentioned, you just saw that the panorama is more complicated than that. Just to produce one book or one title, there are many people involved nowadays. I'm gonna talk about just, well, the most obvious ones: the author, the illustrator, the editor, and the publisher. And so one simple book could be written by an author from, say, Ecuador or Peru or even Nicaragua, but the illustrator is going to be from Argentina or Chile. The editor happens to be in Mexico, and, well, the publisher perhaps is not even Latin American. So just one simple book shows that, the landscape is much more complicated than that. The nationality of the book is much more complicated to say. So, of course, the publishing house always wins. You can say, I want a book from Mexico because it was published in Mexico, but it's more intricate than that. I want to say diversity goes more in when talking about authors and illustrators, because they are all over the place. But it is true that when talking about editors, there is a more centralized landscape here. So I have seen that these 4 countries are much more, well, often show in, book fairs, and they kind of, well, yeah, they are more important in the industry as part of industry. So Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Argentina. And so that's where diversity, well, reduces. And if you talk about publishers also, well, Spain gets involved, as I just said. And that's kind of a tricky situation, because some of the local, publishing houses actually belong to bigger companies that come from Spain. And so, that is not Latin America, but that's how it is. So when we talk about all of the books and what the system works, how the system works, we have to talk about the US too, even if we're referring to Latin American literature. We used to have the big 5 companies of the US in Latin America too. So we also have Penguin Random House producing and publishing books and distributing and circulating all over Latin America. But as you may know, the big 5 are becoming the big 4 and then becoming the big 3. And the problem of concentration in publishing houses is getting, well, more and more of a problem. And that's just talking about publishing houses. But if you talk about distributors, well, yes, there are less and less actors in the ecosystem. And of course, if you talk to any editor in the US and in Latin America, they are gonna tell you that Amazon has changed the landscape and how things work in general. And I'm not gonna, well, long story short, something like 40% of the revenues coming from all Latin American books, well, end up in these companies or corporations. So that is a shame, kind of. But I guess the silver lining is that we are getting more access, or we can find more books now in the US than when I'm sure that what you could find 10 years ago or something. And to end this part with a positive note, I'm gonna say that the magic of the Latin American literature keeps happening thanks to these actors that keep pushing the boundaries of children's literature, that keeps the scene live and vibrant, and that work hard mostly because of, well, love of the books and children's books in particular. So we have independent publishers, some academic researchers, specialists, reading promoters, and that's a very diverse, sphere. So luckily we have that. And the one simple example of what I just said is that Ediciones El Naranjo, that is a small press originally from Mexico, just won the biggest prize that happens to be Bologna Prize for Best Children's Publisher of the Year, and that happened in 2022. So Mexico is there, but also, this Editorial La Manuta, which is a small press from Chile, is also won this year the very same prize. So these are the big, the important things that I want to stress out in this occasion with you. And it's not only the small presses, but also like specific titles, and also, writers or names that keep showing in the, well, they are being recognized worldwide, basically. So you have Roger Mello and Maria Teresa Andrueto that won the Hans Christian Andersen. That's the most important award worldwide for a children's book author. And of course, we have all kinds and of all levels of recognitions. Even you have the lists of the New York Public Library that every year chooses the best books in Spanish, and we always have something there. In total, I searched a lot, but I couldn't find but this number. In 2015, we had this number of books for children that were published in Latin America. The number was published by the Center for the Promotion of Books in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is an organism of the UN, part of the UN. I wouldn't trust so much of this number because it's really hard, like, to count. It all depends on how you count them, and publishers sometimes don't want to share their numbers and whatever. But I really wanted to have to give you an idea of how immense this world is. That was just 1 year, and it does count Spain because it says it's Iberoamerica, but it's just 1 year. So imagine the size or the dimension of what we're talking about here. So I get that it could be overwhelming if you are introducing yourselves to this subject. And I guess I bet the question that you're all wondering is how or what should I choose in this landscape, in this huge universe? So that is what I'm gonna tackle in my third part. Of course, I do not have all the answers. I'm just gonna give you some hints just take it as hints that and some ideas and recommendations of like entryways really of how to approach Latin American lit. But of course, the first answer to that question could be, well, in the first part of the slide, you can see Mafalda, which is, well, super famous in Latin America, a little girl that wants to read something interesting, but she's kind of frustrated because she's learning how to read, and what she's given is just so basic and boring, and it's like so frustrating for her because she's very intelligent, really, and has knowledge of the world and has experience of the world. So this book is not really for her, even if she wants to learn to read. And below you have Charlie Brown, of course, trying to read War and Peace. And so the first answer, of course, I would say it depends on the students or the kids, and not only their ages, not only the levels of reading that they have or the learning or how well they speak Spanish, but also that the experience of life, what interests them, and, well, you know, what kind of things can motivate them to read. And so here I'm going to show you some samples of topics and kind of ideas of activities, and I'm going to try to make them relevant to you and things that you can find actually in the US. And we're going to go through this list very quickly. So first, what I'm calling here culture and heritage. Culture and heritage relate to all the oral tradition that we have inherited all over Latin America, that has to do with myths and legends, that has to do with traditions. And I'm including here some historical novels too. So just as an example, just one author, Judy Goldman, she's very well known in Mexico, and she specializes in these kinds of books. So I've divided here from pre-K to middle school, and just there you have 3 examples of these 3 books. These 3 books cover the subject of the Dia de Muertos, or Day of the Dead, so you have plenty to choose from. And these other 3 books are myths and legends that she kind of rewrites in a very creative way. But of course, myths and legends, we have plenty from all over Latin America, and we have for like smaller kids or like middle schoolers, we have chapter books, but we also have, you know, picture books, and we have, well, this, for instance, this is a collection of collections. So every one of these titles has a collection of myths from the Mayan tradition, and this publishing, this press is from Guatemala. And here we have just one story, just one myth in each of these titles, and the legends come from different countries actually. And these, well, they come from Mexico, and they talk about other kinds of legends like aluches in Yucatan. But we have a collection of stories here from Colombia too. So really, really, there are plenty of options here to choose from. And I know that you would be interested in this because you can share with communities interested in their own heritage in the US if they are of Latin American descent. So I wanted to suggest this idea very quickly. So this is a collection of legends that it includes 3 books or 3 titles, but I want to share the experience of how they were done or they were produced. So this is from a promoter, a reading promoter. Her name is Diana Langarica, and she worked, she organized some workshops with 6 to 9 years old children. She talked to them, she had a first session with them, and they talk about, well, the project and everything. So Then she sent them to do field research, so to ask their parents and their grandparents and their communities to ask for legends from their own town. And then the second session, they come back with the stories that they picked up from them. And that's oral tradition. That's how it has worked with along the centuries, really. So these books actually have the legends as retold by the kids. And it was a group activity, and then you have it in writing and with good quality of publishing, of course. So this might be a good idea if you want to try with your students, or if you just want to, read this as an example. And now that we're talking about oral tradition and heritage, we have to recognize and remember that Latin America doesn't just have one language. It has, or there are many languages altogether, of course. So it's not, children's books in Latin America are not just about appropriation of traditions and culture, but there are also, all kinds of languages that come from indigenous communities. So I found that there are like 400 different languages in the continent, well, from Mexico to Argentina. And just in Mexico, we have like 68 indigenous languages. And there has been an effort, a huge effort, to publish children books in their languages, or, bilingual, Spanish and in their language. So these are just some examples, very handpicked, of what's out there. This is an effort. I know it's not in the market. It's not what are selling the most, but it's there. And well, of course, it's important to mention it. We have this also project that I really love. If you want to check that out, I don't think we have the time to see it. But the thing, it's a collection of myths and legends, or stories, or short stories, told in their own languages. It's 68. It's a collection of 68 short stories, and it calls for digital lit too. So there are some very short videos, and you can listen to the different languages, and the the animations are really beautiful. So I recommend you to go through them. The second big theme, or the second trend that I want to talk about is that in Latin American literature, we are not afraid of talking about tough topics. As Adolfo Córdoba, who is also a good specialist in the subject, he says that, the children's literature in Latin America has the power of imagination to transform or overcome adult-centered behaviors, the courage to recognize that for many, childhood is no paradise, and that children and young people are dealing with crises such as forced migrations and disappearances. So when it comes to talk about tough topics, Latin American books are making a real effort of doing it, either representing the experience of children that are going through these kind of problems, or, to talk about these problems with children that are perhaps not going through them, but, to motivate and emphasize empathy and some kind of understanding of what it is. So I'm not going one by one. I'm just gonna share 3 examples just because I love them. I'm basically sharing my favorite books here. So for instance, if you need to talk about death with a kid, for instance, that lost grandma or grandpa, or, a cat, this book by Paloma Valdivia is really beautiful. It recently helped me, so I really recommend it, because it tackles the subject in a direct and yet touching way. And the illustrations are really beautiful. But if you want to talk about war and social conflict, which, by the way, is super relevant nowadays, This Edna Iturralde, she's from Ecuador, but this is a collection of short stories that talk about war actually in other zones of the world. Well, it does talk about I believe Colombia as in Latin America, but it also tackles problems, you know, in Palestine and Ukraine. So it might be pertinent. Of course, it's not for everyone. I would recommend it for like middle school or even high school, but it's a very good example of how we talk about war and social conflict in Latin America. And I'm including, of course, migration. So we have a lot of books about migration, and this one in particular, I love that has been translated into English. I chose the cover in English because the original name is, well, Migrantes. The author is from Peru. And I also love that the characters are animals. So it's not talking about a specific kind of migration, but migration as a general, you know, situation that happens in the world. So another idea, I would say, take it as a challenge. Think of a specific topic, any topic really, and try to make a list of books about it. If you don't want to do the research yourself, that's the kind of challenge that you should try to come to your librarian, school librarian, or, you know, someone at the bookshop, and they are gonna help you with that. I used to do this, and I used to enjoy to do the collections of whatever topics that people needed. I'm going to talk about altogether what I'm calling here reloaded tales and humor, because of course we have that in Latin America too. It's not all so dark. So we also have reversions and retellings of Little Red Hood or, you know, Cinderella. And I'm showing here just a few of them, but there are many examples. And of course, what happens in the US in the market is happening also in Latin America. So publishers are also, you know, pushing for new stories about princesses, or this collection that is called anti-princesses. And they are like kind of changing the way we talk about witches, like in a positive way, and like subverting, you know, the normal conception of it, or the classic obsolete conception of it. And my idea here for you is to use this one. I really love this La Casa de Chocolate because it's also a different genre. Here you have drama. It's a theater, it's a play, and you can you know, do that with your students if you will. It's about Hansel and Gretel Pacheco. It's very, very funny. Of course, there's a twist. I'm not gonna do any spoilers here, but the ending, well, it's original and very creative. So please go ahead and try to do that because it's super funny. And talking about humor, we have many of those examples in Latin America. We like rhymes, we like wordplay, and that's a very nice way to engage new readers in, you know, in as children's, but also if an adult or someone grown up is trying to learn Spanish or something. We have many of these kind of books. This is just an example of a collection of poems, but they are super, super funny. And as you can see in the second page here, there's also a little bit of visual poetry here. This is another example. And this one is a board book, but that's interesting because this one is wordless. So you don't even need to know the language. It's for like pre-K and K, but really anyone can enjoy this book because it's super funny and it does tell a story, and in a very interesting format because it's folded. I think it kind of reminds of the ancient codex that we have. So I'm putting here an example of those ancient codex. And that Jipo wasn't the only one example that we have in Latin America. We have this other like new classic by Sol. She's from Argentina, and it's kind of the same format. So another suggestion would be to, you know, read these kinds of books and then make your students draw or write books in this very same format. Is really funny. This is another idea of promoting reading, Latin American literature reading. There's this idea, this comes from Mexico, and it's a calendar. So you can hang the calendar in the classroom and put the names of your students when their birthdays are. And every month they celebrate one specific author. So for instance, January 2024 is going to celebrate Luis Pesetti from Argentina. He's a very humorous author also. So you can have that as a way to motivate the reading of this author in that particular month. So it's really a nice tool to do that. And well, finally, I'm gonna say that in Latin America, there is this motivation to actually have works of art, or, you know, to propose and to have very creative things that push the boundaries and, you know, expand the concept of children's literature. And we have won, well, not me, but they have won awards. So this is the example that I just mentioned before. This book won an award because it's so beautiful, but also it's useful because it's bilingual, Spanish and Braille. So we have that kind of books in Latin America too. This one is also in Braille, and the experience of reading it, even with your eyes closed, because it has the texture, is really, really recommendable. And we haven't touched the important point that in Latin America, there's also Brazil, and Brazil, they speak Portuguese, of course. And so I just wanted to mention this as an example that they also have a lot to offer. Roger Melo is an important author there. This particular book is not only an example of the ones that talk about like tough topics, because it does tackle social and environmental issues, but also it's a piece of art. And luckily, there's no translation into Spanish, but there is a translation into English. So I really recommend this, the experience of reading this. It's, well, it's a beauty. So just getting to the closure, to closing here, the takeaways that I think you can get here is, well, of course, Latin American children's literature is an immense universe. It has a very long tradition, but it's also at the forefront of what's happening in children's literature worldwide. And of course, it offers a lot of opportunities for educators and students in the US. I showed you all kinds of formats. I showed you some examples of all kinds of grades and reading levels and languages. Of course, we have lots of different languages and translations, and some of them are also bilingual. And let me tell you here, it all depends on the objectives that you have. So maybe if you want to foster language learning or practice, well, there's a chance to do that. If you just want to have fun and encourage reading aloud, well, I showed you some examples too. And there are some also ways to connect with your peers and their families in the Latinx communities. And also, well, of course, what's literature for anyways? To share experiences and develop empathy. So I would say that's the most important thing and the key point here. So I would say with that, I would be closing here. I think I went over for a few minutes, but I hope it's all good here.
Fabuloso, Gina. Excelente. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for sharing so much you took us to a wonderful introductory of children's literature, because many of us are not experts on this topic, and you provided us a really thorough intro. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your books. Amazing. So we do have a few minutes for questions. So please feel free to write your question in the Q&A box, and I will be reading them to you. I believe you can also view them, but I'll read them aloud for those that can't view. So we have a few questions from Deborah Maldonada de Oliveira. And the first question is, can comics and graphic novels aimed at children's considered as children's literature to use in class? I'm thinking examples like La Familia Burrón.
I would say so, yes, except that La Familia Burrón is not exactly for children, but we have a lot of graphic novels in Latin America too. So, of course, I would say so, and there's a trend into producing more and more of this. So I would say, yeah.
And then another one from the same person. Given the latest news about banned books, have any of these books you mentioned been subjected to parents' objections about the topics?
You mean like in Latin America? I don't think so. Not as like huge debates that I know of. Maybe sometimes there's been discussion, a public discussion here and there, but there is no such like a strong movement for banning books in Latin America, unlike the US. So yeah.
También tenemos comentarios dándote las gracias de Denise Cabanal, Glover, y una pregunta en español. You can also write questions in Spanish, in English. ¿Existe alguna guía de editores que se ocupan de libros infantiles en Latinoamérica?
Yes, I'm gonna answer in English, but I'm gonna say yes. I don't know if I can share this presentation with you guys. I can like give the presentation to you, and then you can perhaps share them with you. But I am including a couple of resources in the end. So we have guías, not the editores specifically, but like every year the International Book Association in Mexico and the US, they share guías of the best books of the year. And there are a couple of websites that do kind of the same thing. So it does help to know where to start, or, you know, as a guide. There are kind of, yeah, a couple of sites, and I am including them in the resources list.
We still have a few minutes. I know that you had a video. I'm not sure if you want to share it in the many minutes that we have. If there's anything else that you would like to expand.
Well, you know, I did have a video, but it was an example of one of those short stories about that has been part of the 68 Voices project. So it's a video of Purepecha's story. I don't know if you want to see that, but it's super short. So yeah, I can share that. I just need to share again my screen, right?
Yes.
Just give me a second.
And for those who are asking about this presentation, yes, it has been recorded and it will be made public. It will be we'll be sharing the link to all of you who registered, so you will be receiving a link within a week, as well as the resources that Gina is going to be sharing with us.
Okay, let me know if it works.
Sí.
Yontka tatabasco de Quiroga, Zimanin zun perate chanson inzeast, Jintecumanchecuan, en Zinahperan, en Huenap, Ungan, Ishu, Michoacán, Cajiman Hingon, Nanawar Saludin, en Pátzcuarjacán, Huenan Kaman, Nanawar, Huanacon peratechan, Utpesan, Isenpox, Huecasp, esquiamin tukuripun maruatpepi. En guanopestangan petanganga wananchech inchame guaranapocha expampitación hamil. En caximanin tan imecher kumanchacuar curacuparin nanawarin es uchacuara ka esnomen miricuaria. Mencux tanguamin wancuruchech luchacuparin icharutecha kananawarin xini ungaritin purietir tinskimbo himproxias en cartueran ariguac curuchurapitichan huacar nanawarin ma eran ariguan. Nonani harasti parakpin quinten hasma curuch cajucharis parich patan cacuachacuan. Isa yang pisen hucha purecha.
So really, it's super short, but I want to say it's a whole experience to listen to the different 68 languages that we have, and they are all coming from oral tradition. So yeah, that's. Oh, did I do something wrong?
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay.
You're fine. Well, thank you so much for showing that video. It's really short but really powerful, and I think the audience here appreciates it. So we have a question from Victoria Vargas, a librarian at a dual school, and she's saying that I need to have access to these books for K through to 5, and we lack these kinds of books. How can I buy these books?
Well, I mean, like I said, there are tons of distributors now that work in the business of selling books for schools, libraries, and all kinds of institutions, and of course, like individually. I didn't put together a list of those distributors, but there's one in LA, there's one in San Diego, there's one, and they all ship countrywide. So I know it's easy, and you can find them.
Well, thank you, Gina. Well, I know you mentioned that you will be sharing some resources with the audience, because our audience is really mixed. I think we have a mix of librarians, many educators, and open to the general public. And there's so much interest on having access to this book. So any resources or links that you can share with us, we will highly appreciate it, especially with our teachers that are always looking into ways of bringing in this materials to the students in the Los Angeles area.
Of course, yeah. I didn't want to share like business links,
Yes.
but I am sharing all kinds of resources that has to do with associations and networks and events that might be of interest. So I think they are going to be useful for you all.